The silence in the small village of Nara, centuries ago, had a weight unlike any you had ever felt. It clung cold and heavy along your spine, long before the faint pale blue of the winter dawn had fully seeped through the paper screens. You awoke to the unforgiving stiffness of the tatami beneath your body, your limbs numb and slow, as the brittle cold air slipped in quietly through a narrow crack in the door. The wood of the old workshop creaked softly in greeting as you rose, each groan a subtle reminder of age, decay, and secrets that refused to fade. Your faded kimono, rough against your skin, wrapped tightly around your aching frame. Outside, a thin mist oozed from the barred windows, carrying with it the dense scent of dried ink and freshly cut wood. Beneath it all sat the faint, lingering aroma of incense, smoldering low since the night before. Your day began always the same, the slow, deliberate polishing of the fragile lacquer on the masks, resting in neat rows on the shelves. Their empty eyes seemed to follow your every movement, watching in silence as your fingers traced the worn curves and chipped edges. The soft, rhythmic whisper of sandpaper against wood was a lonely heartbeat in the vast quiet. As your hand moved again and again, grinding away minutes of your strength with each pass, each mask beneath your touch harbored a memory, a presence that would never truly leave, no matter how long you worked or how careful you were. The village lay silent beneath a thick veil of fog, the houses stoic and still, as if holding their breath. Your breath came out in slow clouds, the cold biting lightly at your skin. The frost cracked beneath your cautious footsteps, an echo in the empty street that startled the night's rest more deeply than it should. If today a dead phone battery caused despair, you thought grimly, imagine the desperation of watching your last firewood burn itself to ash under a silent, indifferent moon. At the heart of this cold morning, a faint warmth briefly brushed your senses, the shared glow of the village hearths, the quiet comfort of others gathered nearby, their hushed voices weaving an intangible thread of connection through the chill. For a moment, you allowed yourself to sink into that ember of hope, feeling less alone amid the vast shadows that surrounded you. But soon, the weight of your task returned. Tonight, you had to complete the mask, the one the old stories whispered about, the one said to carry a price heavier than any other. As you approached the narrow, shadowed corridors of the workshop, the air thickened. An unnatural stillness fell suddenly. The stray dogs stopped their barking abruptly, and a quick, unspoken glance passed between neighbors outside, as if they too sensed something hidden just beyond the edge of sight. You moved forward, every scrape of the sandpaper sounding unusually loud in the silence that had descended. The dim light flickered uncertainly across the lacquered faces, and the walls seemed to breathe quietly around you. The line between creation and the otherworldly had never felt so faint and so perilous. Hey, before Morpheus catches you completely, take a quick moment to check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button has vanished, and I wouldn't want you to miss the next sleep stories. While you're at it, leave a like soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The cold weight that had settled around your shoulders tightened as you stepped deeper into the dim workshop. The air, thickened with dust and age, clung heavily to your skin. Each breath you drew was measured, slow, as if pulling the air too quickly could break the fragile silence that held the room captive. Your fingers, still trembling slightly from the chill, hesitated over the final mask resting upon the wooden table before you. Its lacquered surface bore the faintest of cracks, whispering of time's unyielding march, and beneath its pristine facade, an old story awaited, but danger, veiled and patient. Faint creaks from the weathered floorboards echoed softly as you adjusted your stance, the worn fabric of your kimono pressing coldly against your ribs. Your eyes traced the delicate brushstrokes on the mask's surface, the trace of patterns that only revealed themselves under the faint flickering of a restless lantern. The shadows danced gently, brushing against the worn paper walls like tired ghosts reluctant to leave their post. You could almost feel the lingering gaze of the masks surrounding you, their hollow eyes heavy with silent judgment, or perhaps quiet warnings. A breath escaped your lips and hung momentarily in the frigid air, condensing before vanishing into the stillness. The familiarity of the workshop wrapped around you like a shroud, the scent of aged cedar mingling with the faint, lingering smoke of last night's incense. The faint salt of perspiration on your brow was a subtle reminder that inside this stillness, tension simmered beneath every motion, every scratch of sandpaper, every careful touch. You reached for the pale cloth to wipe your clammy hands, the fibers rough but comforting in a way. Your mind drifted briefly to the village beyond, the heavy fog pressing against the small windows, muffling the distant cries of stray animals and the hushed whispers of neighbors, attempting to hold their breath against some unspoken fear. The brittle cold pressed in on you, but within it, a fragile ember of calmness glowed. Perhaps it was the thought of neighbors braving the long day, sharing similar burdens beneath their roofs, or the distant chime of the temple bell breaking through the silence with its slow, steady toll. Whatever it was, for a heartbeat, the oppressive solitude loosened its grip. Returning your focus, your hands moved deliberately over the mask. You traced the fine lines where lacquer had chipped, feeling the subtle ridges beneath your fingertips. Time slowed further as you began the first delicate strokes of polishing. The soft hiss of sandpaper against wood pulling you deeper into methodical rhythm. Each movement was a fragile dance. Too much pressure would permanently harm the work. Too little would leave imperfections that whispered. Your pulse slowed to match the slow, deliberate brushing, the tapping of your breath, the faint creaks from the aging walls, sounds woven together into a tapestry of quiet perseverance. The weight of the task settled like clay over your chest. This mask, unlike the others, held something more than the delicate sheen of craftsmanship. It carried the old stories, whispered warnings wary with caution. You could almost hear the faint rustle of fabric, a stirring in the still air as your mind replayed a memory. The villagers speaking in low tones about the cost of completion, the price paid beyond visible scars. You took a measured breath. The fear coursed subtly through your veins, an unyielding shadow just at the edges of your vision, reminding you to move slowly, to be patient. Minutes passed uncounted, and your fingers repeated their ritual, tracing the curves, smoothing the edges. The flickering lantern cast long shadows that wavered, breathing with the slow exhale of the cold night outside. You allowed your hand to pause for a moment, feeling the faint heat radiating from the single salt lamp nearby. Its glow cast a thick honey light, a soft comfort against the chill pressing through the room. For an instant, you felt a quiet tether to the living world, a reminder that beyond the threat, the night held warmth and light in its hidden folds. The air shifted almost imperceptibly. Somewhere beyond the thin paper screens, a wooden door creaked, brittle and slow, as if stirred by cautious footsteps. Your heart caught in quiet surprise, yet no shadow passed beneath the doorway. Perhaps a neighbor, beginning their own morning ritual, or a stray cat slipping through a crack. The tension held, taut and fragile. You returned your gaze to the mask, now halfway polished, the once dull finish blossoming slowly into a muted gleam. Your skin prickled as the faintest draft sought entrance through a crack in the floor. The cold seeped beneath your sleeves, nesting in the crook of your elbow. Your breath, slow and deliberate, filled the room and mixed momentarily with the scent of burnt wood and aged paper. The moment stretched. Outside, the village remained shrunk beneath its blanket of gray, silent and hesitating, as if waiting for an unseen signal. Careful not to disturb the delicate peace, you stood and padded quietly to the narrow shelves housing the other masks. They sat in stoic rows, each one a silent sentinel bearing witness to your every move. Their empty eyes, holes without life, seemed to grow heavier in the fading lantern light, holding the weight of forgotten tales and unspoken fears. You pressed a hand lightly against the coolest surface of one carved with faint floral motifs, its texture rough in contrast to the smoothness of the lacquer you had just tended. Turning back to your task, the clockwork rhythm resumed. The polish passed slowly, the grain beneath your hand yielding stories only the light dared reveal. Your heart whispered warnings you dared not fully hear. The night would end soon. The mask must be finished. The ancient price must be paid. As your fingers traced the final curve, a sudden flicker of movement caught your sight. At the workshop's far corner, a thin veil of darkness twisted where no shadow should be. You blinked, and it remained, subtle but watching, something waiting just beyond the edge of comprehension. The hairs at the back of your neck rose with a soft shiver. The stillness around you deepened, an unspoken silence swelling between the breath and the next. And from that quiet, the faintest sound, a whisper not spoken aloud, brushed the edges of your hearing, a secret only the darkness seemed willing to share. You stepped closer, compelled despite the tremor in your limbs. The room held its breath. The mask awaited completion. The price was no longer just a story whispered in the night. It was coming. The faint veil of darkness at the workshop's far corner seemed to breathe with a quiet impatience, lingering just beyond the edge of vision. Your fingers hesitated on the smooth curve of the mask, the thin layers of lacquer catching the faint light and reflecting a pale sheen, fragile yet stubborn. The room held its breath with you, the chill tightening its grip once more as dust motes floated slowly in the golden lantern glow. Each grain moved with the ghost of a current, invisible yet undeniable, teasing the edges of the unseen presence. You shifted your weight, the worn tatami beneath, offering its familiar, unforgiving resistance. Your breath came slow, deliberate, misting softly in the still air. The faint tick of the temple bell drifted in from some distant corner of the village, slow, insistent, a heartbeat tethered to the steady pulse of the frozen morning. You closed your eyes briefly, feeling the weight of solitude, heavy yet oddly comforting, like the steady embrace of cold stone pressing against skin. Opening your eyes, you found your gaze dragged again towards the shadowed corner. The darkness had not moved, but something deeper pulsed within it, a subtle vibration, like the faintest echo of whispered secrets carried through the latticewood of the paper screens. You swallowed the dryness that had risen in your throat and reached for the cloth once more. The texture was coarse, the fibers fraying slightly at the edges. A small comfort against the creeping. Cold, as your hand swept carefully across the mask's curve, you traced once more the fine cracks hidden beneath its lacquered surface. Each imperfection seemed to hum with history, a story pressed just beneath your skin. The scent of smoked wood filled your nostrils again, mingling with the faint, lingering trace of incense, faded now, but stubborn in its resistance against the chill. Somewhere beyond the narrow windows, the mist thickened, pressing in like a slow tide, silent and unyielding. The floor creaked beneath your cautious step as you moved closer to the darkened corner. The worn fabric of your kimono whispering softly with each motion. Your hand clenched briefly into a loose fist as a sudden prickle ran down your spine, a reaction more ancient than your conscious mind could explain. The masks on the shelves seemed to their hollow, unblinking eyes, their stillness a quiet, pressing presence. For a long moment, the silence stretched, folded around you like a heavy shroud. You felt the roughness of the wood beneath your fingertips, grounding you, tethering you to the present. Yet the darkness waited still, patient and unyielding, a subtle weight balancing the fragile quiet. Your pulse slowed again, matching the cadence of the worn breath inside the workshop and the distant tolling bell that counted away the cold minutes. You returned to the mask on the table, your touch resuming its measured rhythm. The sandpaper glided in slow arcs, the hiss of abrasion soft and steady, weaving a fragile harmony with the faint creaks of the building and the gentle shuffling of your own movements. Polishing, smoothing, restoring. Each pass was a meditation, a ritual that carved away not just imperfections, but the sharp edges of worry coiling beneath your ribs. Outside, the village remained motionless beneath the heavy fog. The thick gray swallowed every detail, but the occasional rustle of dry leaves, brittle and lifeless, skittering across the cracked earth. You heard nothing else. No footsteps or voices dared to break the oppressive hush that cloaked the streets like a slow, locking breath. A sudden shift in the air drew your attention. A soft, almost imperceptible sound, like the dragging scrape of wood, barely resisting an unseen force. You held your breath, your gaze flickering across the walls, as if searching for a crack or a shadow that might betray the source. But the workshop offered only silence in return. The dense quiet felt almost unnatural now, as if the walls themselves were leaning inward, listening. The mask beneath. Your hands seemed to pulse faintly, the layers of varnish catching a momentary shimmer beneath the lantern's sputtering light. You sensed the old story breathing alongside you, the whispered warnings, the tale of cost and consequence. Your fingers lingered on one chipped edge, willing the fragile lacquer to hold just a moment longer. You pressed your palm against the worn wood of the table, grounding yourself once more. The cold seeped insidiously into your bones, mingling with a slow, rising tension that you dared neither name nor deny. The price whispered beyond the mask's surface waited patiently, its weight pressing deeper with every passing second. A sudden crack, soft and brittle, shattered the fragile stillness. The floorboard near your feet whispered its betrayal, a sound swallowed almost immediately by the blank walls. Your heart thumped loud in your chest, each beat a solitary drum in the quiet night. You froze, breath held taut, eyes fixated on the swaying shadows cast by the flickering lantern. Slowly, a narrow shaft of moonlight pierced the dust-laden air through the slatted roof above, its pale breath illuminating the corner where darkness had dwelled. In that fleeting glow, a shimmer shifted, subtle and disturbingly alive. You felt the weight in the room shift, as if the very air held its breath alongside you. Your hand trembled as you laid the sandpaper down. The ritual was almost complete. The mask's surface now gleamed with a dull, brooding light, concealing all but the faintest scars beneath its lacquer. The final touch lingered just out of reach, a breath away from completion. And then, in the silence that returned, a voice, soft and unintelligible, brushed against the edge of your hearing. Not words, but a sound, like the sigh of wind through autumn leaves, or the distant crackling of embers long gone cold. You turned your head slowly toward the opposite wall, where the shadows had deepened. You could feel it now, the unseen presence drawing near, patient, deliberate, waiting for the story to be finished, so the price could finally be paid. Your fingers hovered over the mask once again. The breath in the room grew heavier, and in that moment of fragile stillness, the mask's eyes seemed to open just a fraction, staring back into yours. The flicker of the lantern cast wavering shadows across the worn wooden walls, the corners of the workshop trembling with each feeble breath of light. Your gaze remained fixed on the mask before you, its dull lacquer now shimmering faintly, a half-forgotten glow in the dense cold. Your fingers hovered but hesitated, unwilling to close the last circle of this quiet, heavy ritual. The air pressed upon you, thick with the scent of aged cedar and smoke, and a faint metallic tang that seemed to seep from the very grain beneath your palms. You shifted your weight, the tatami beneath your feet creaking softly, a low echo in the deep silence. The cold curled along your spine, tendrils of frost creeping beneath your sleeves to rest against your skin. Half a breath later, it retreated, a ghost of winter clinging briefly before leaving you to the solemn stillness of the workshop. Each inhale brought the faintest taste of ash, lingering incense, burning long past its welcome, weaving with the earthy musk of old wood and dust. The dark corner of the room, where shadows twisted and breathed like restless spirits, pulled at your awareness. For a heartbeat, your eyes searched it again, tracing the subtle distortions, a trick of light, or something older, watching from just beyond the veil you could touch, but never fully see. The presence pressed quietly, weightless yet undeniable, anchoring your breath, slowing the pulse in your veins to a measured rhythm. A faint rustling whispered, drawing your senses outward. Outside, the frost-cracked earth barely carried a single sound. The village lay wrapped in its thick fog, motionless as if the morning itself held its breath. Somewhere distant, the temple bell tolled slowly, a note stretched across time and space, deep and resolute. Your fingers finally brushed the surface of the mask again, moving with deliberate softness as the sandpaper slipped between your hands. The grain beneath yielded slowly, smoothing rough edges as the lacquer bloomed quietly into a muted light. Each stroke carried the weight of centuries, an echo of delicate hands that had shaped and polished before, careful not to awaken the hidden price and secret locked beneath the mask's fragile beauty. Time folded inward, each moment stretching out, a languid thread pulling you deeper into the unspoken task. Despite the cold, a faint heat radiated from your chest, a tempered warmth that pressed against the chill, a slow pulse of life within the dying shadows. You drew the cloth, the rough fibers a small comfort against trembling skin, wiping away invisible dust as if cleansing the very air around you. The masks lining the shelves seemed to breathe along with you, a silent chorus of eyes unblinking, watching, waiting. Their faces cracked and faded, whispering stories only the lonely night could hear. Another faint noise stirred, barely a tremor. The narrow wooden door at the workshop's far end groaned, a sound lighter than a sigh, hesitant and slow. You froze, breath held in fragile balance. No shadow moved with it. No wind passed through the layered screens. Yet the stillness deepened, pressing against your senses like a heavy cloth. You could almost hear the heartbeat of the village itself, faint and steady beneath the layers of frost and silence. Returning to the mask, your hands traced the delicate cracks hidden beneath the sheen, fingertips grazing the fragile history embedded in every line. The gentle hiss of sandpaper whispered a steady rhythm, harmonizing with the soft creaks of the old building settling, as if time itself moved with measured patience. You let your pulse slow, matching the calm cadence of your breath and the far-off bell, each sound grounding you in the fragile present. Without thought, your gaze drifted to the single salt lamp nearby. Its amber light spilled around the room like liquid honey, touching the edges of darkness with warmth, coaxing shadows back to life. For a moment, you leaned into that small glow, letting its quiet fire brush away the sharp edges of fear. The cold softened, melting just enough to let a sliver of peace settle beneath your ribs. But the presence in the corner remained, patient and unseen, a subtle vibration, like a breath held and released beneath the floorboards. Your heart trembled lightly, a quiet urgency rising beneath your calm. You pressed your palm against the table's worn surface, grounding yourself against the creeping unease. The lacquered mask pulsed faintly beneath your fingers, less object now, more living memory, fragile yet stubbornly enduring. Suddenly, the sharp crack of a splinter beneath your foot shattered the fragile veil of silence. Your breath caught and halted, a single bead of sweat tracing a cold path down your temple. The shadows flickered, swallowing the lamp's glow for a split second before returning with a thin, trembling light. A chill, deeper than the winter air, wound its way around you, tightening with each exhale, heavy with unspoken promise. You looked once again at the dark corner where the veil of shadow gathered, the amber light struggling to touch the depths. The slight shimmer you had seen moments before rippled, like a shiver passing through something that should not be. The room seemed to lean closer, walls bending inward with the weight of unseen eyes. Your fingers found the sandpaper again, but your motion was slow now, cautious, deliberate. The ritual was nearly complete. The mask gleamed with a sorrowful grace, concealing beneath its surface the stories etched into every crack and faded stroke. And then, just as your breath slowed to match the steady toll of the distant bell, a whisper, soft, unintelligible, brushed the edge of your hearing. Not a word, but a sound born from the spaces between silence, the exhale of shadows folding around you. You turned slowly toward the wall opposite the masks. The darkness had deepened, thickening like ink spilled on parchment. In its center, eyes, no, one single eye, opened just a fraction, a flicker of life beneath the lacquered mask's hollow gaze. The weight of the room shifted, the air thickening with the promise of the unseen. And in that breath-held moment, you understood. The story was no longer just whispered legend. It was watching. It was waiting. And it had just begun to stir. The fragile shimmer of the lacquered mask held your gaze, a slow pulse beneath your fingertips, like the faint beating of a secret heart. The room, heavy with dust and quiet decades, seemed to lean closer, as if waiting with bated breath alongside you. Your kimono shifted softly against the worn tatami, the fabric whispering faint protests as you adjusted your stance. Muscles stiff but steady. Outside, the fog wrapped the village in a silent shawl, blotting out color and muffling sound, leaving only the steady, insistent toll of the distant temple bell to mark the passing time. Your breath rose in pale clouds, curling and fading into the stillness, each exhale a soft ghost vanishing against an unseen chill. Your fingers resumed their careful rub, coaxing the faint glow from beneath cracks that had held stories centuries old. The scent of burnt incense mingled with cedar and aged wood, thick in the heavy air, grounding you in this moment, suspended between past and present. The mask's surface smoothed beneath the sandpaper, revealing the muted depth of its craftsmanship. Yet beneath that beauty, the ancient burden waited patiently, like a breath held just out of reach. Each stroke was a slow landscape, the roughness of the cloth against your palm, the fine grain yielding beneath the pressure, the soft scrape breaking the oppressive silence. The flickering lantern cast hesitating shadows that slipped cautiously along the crumbling walls, their edges wavering like thin veils in a breeze you could not feel. Through the paper screens, the fog shifted like silent waves, pressing inward, blurring the world beyond. Somewhere far off, The murmur of neighbors exchanging hushed greetings floated briefly before dissolving into the thickness of cold air. A sudden creak, delicate as a spider's thread, pulled your attention to the distant corner where the shadows had gathered. Your breath stilled, caught in the fragile web of cold tension. There was nothing moving, yet the darkness seemed to pulse with a muted life, a slow stirring beneath the visible, like something waiting just beyond the veil of your senses. The masks leaned closer in shadowed trust, their hollow eyes deep pools of memory staring unblinkingly. You reached out, but hesitated, the rough cloth pausing against the lacquered curve. The faint warmth blossomed in your chest, a remnant of embered hearths scattered through the village, the freezing air. It lingered briefly, a flicker of human softness beneath the weight of solitude and silence. You drew the cloth again, delicate fibers catching the dim light as you wiped an invisible layer of dust from the table, each movement deliberate, heavy with meaning. The polish continued, slow and unhurried, threading the minutes into a long ribbon of quiet ritual. The fragile piece shattered with a soft crack beneath your foot, a splinter surrendering after years of silence. Your heart jumped, a sudden drumbeat in the vast stillness, but you kept still, senses stretched taut and waiting. The shadows wobbled briefly in the lantern's uncertain light, swallowing and releasing the glow as if breathing. You dared not speak or move suddenly. The stillness pressed in like a wet cloth, thick with unspoken fear and expectation. The dark corner again, where the veil of shadow seemed to twist in on itself. The faintest shimmer rippled, like a breath exhaled by some hidden breath, an edge of something ancient brushing the boundary between this world and the next. Your fingers trembled slightly, yet returned to the mask, the ritual demanding slow completion, the task heavier with each passing breath. The varnish gleamed dimly, a ribbon of reflected light, yet holding the deepest shadow just beneath its surface. Outside, the fog deepened. The village held its breath with you, mute and waiting behind every shutter and shuttered window. The temple bell chimed once more, a slow, deliberate note stretching through the thick, frozen air and anchoring you to the fragile now. The masks around you seemed to close ranks, leaning inward, their presence an unyielding chorus of silent witnesses. You swept the cloth one last time, feeling the warmth from your palms seep into the surface, as if passing a quiet benediction to the ancient wood. The edges of the mask's lacquer hummed with barely contained tension, a hidden weight palpable beneath your touch. A whisper brushed your ear, not a word, but the soft sigh of wind threading between the paper walls, or perhaps the faint rustling of old promises not yet kept. Turning slowly, your gaze found the corner again, the dark heart of the workshop, where night met shadow. There, within the ink-black folds, the faintest flicker of light shifted and grew, and I, not quite seen, but felt, catching the amber glow of the salt lamp and reflecting it back with a quiet, knowing patience. The room seemed to fold in around you, every breath. Thickening, the air dense with the weight of promise and quiet menace. Your fingers froze on the mask's surface, the final touch suspended like a bound breath. Time stretched thin, the moment balancing between what was and what was yet to come. The stories whispered in this place turned their attention to you, as if the mask's silent gaze was no longer empty, but waiting, awake and watching. And beneath the whispered silence, you understood with sudden clarity. The price was no longer a distant story to be feared. It was here, it was patient, and it had just begun to claim its due. The weight in the workshop thickened, a quiet gravity that pressed against your lungs with each measured inhale. The shadows in the far corner churned, no longer fixed, but stretching, folding like slow tides, shifting beneath an unseen moon. Your fingers lingered atop the lacquered mask, the faint warmth beneath your touch a fragile promise against the creeping cold that clawed at your skin. The faint crackle of the incense, smoldering low in its holder, punctuated the silence, a steady hum of life amid the stillness. The rough fibers of the cloth rested in your hand, worn and soft, comforting as you swept it gently across the mask's surface once more. Deliberate and tender strokes tracing the fine fractures, coaxing them to disappear under layers of time and patience. The scent of cedar mingled with ash, the aroma thick and rooted in this place, settling into your senses like a familiar song, remembered after long silence. Your breath rose and fell slowly, the exhale a thin mist curling and folding into the fog, pressed close against the workshop's paper screens. Outside, the village emerged, muted and slow. Houses standing somber, their silhouettes swallowed beneath the heavy white drape clinging to every surface. A distant bell tolled, each heavy note stretching through the cold air, a tether to the world beyond these walls, a reminder of time's unyielding march forward. Your eyes returned to the dark corner. The flickering lantern's glow barely brushed the ink-black void, nestled there, thick shadow curling like smoke woven from secrets. Something unseen hovered just beyond touch. You felt it waiting, patient but undeniable, a presence threading itself quietly into the heavy air. A chill traveled down your spine, slow and deliberate, like the lengthening shadow of an old storm rolling over sea waves. Each breath drew colder, the thin air slipping between your ribs and cooling the warmth you had built. Yet, beneath it all, a faint ember flickered. Not far away, the soft murmur of distant voices, neighbors exchanging low words behind frosted windows. their shadows flickering like slow flames dancing in hearthlight, wove a fragile thread through the vast silence. For a fragile moment, the vast loneliness yielded to a quiet comfort, a subtle pulse of shared existence beneath the biting cold. You shifted, the tatami beneath creaking softly, its familiar refusal, grounding you, even as the cold hands of unease reached deeper. The fabric of your kimono brushed with a ghosted whisper as you retraced your steps toward the narrow shelves, holding countless masks, each one a frozen echo of faces long gone, bearing witness with hollow, all-seeing eyes. You pressed a palm tentatively against the carved wood of one worn mask, its rough texture stark beneath your fingertips. A breath escaped, hanging in the chilly room. The masks waited, stark sentinels in quiet rows, their silence pressing heavy and full of stories swallowed by time. Returning to the table, the mask beneath your fingers shimmered faintly, the lacquer catching the otherworldly light in slow, uneven pulses. Your hand found the sandpaper again, fingers moving through the measured rhythm. The soft hiss and slow scrape, pulling you deeper into the ritual's endless sweep. Each stroke a stitch in the fabric of waiting. Each pass smoothing not just wood, but the sharp, winding edges of fear coiling beneath your skin. The lantern flickered suddenly, casting long shadows that quivered like breathing things against the worn walls. You swallowed, heart tightening, sharp yet controlled, like the press of a cold blade resting near vulnerable skin. The workshop exhaled through the creaking floorboards and rustling paper. The building itself stirred with slow, cautious breath. Somewhere, just beyond the mental edge of hearing, the faint scrape of a sliding door whispered, weightless, deliberate, but dissolved before recognition could catch hold. Your vision softened, focusing on the fragile surface in your hands. The mask's lacquer gleamed now with a muted depth, richer and more opaque than before, shadows pooling beneath the layer, concealing the oldest secrets hidden beneath its smooth heart. Each crack beneath your fingertips seemed alive, pulsing faintly with a memory neither kind nor cruel, merely waiting. The tension coiled tighter, a knot of silent breath held between the soft rustling of your clothes and the distant toll of the bell, refusing to hurry the night's pace. Then the air shifted, barely perceptible, like a slow breath drawn just beyond the barrier of your awareness. A faint in the dark corner, a ripple running through the shadows, as if something folded itself awake from ages spent in patient stillness. Your pulse, steady yet alert, sent a subtle tremor through your limbs as eyes, no, a single flicker of recognition opened just enough to meet your own. Pale and unreadable beneath the veil of lacquer, it blinked, exhaling a silent understanding that this moment no longer belonged entirely to you. You froze. The soft hiss of the sandpaper faded into the background hum of the workshop, breathing around you, an ancient rhythm, folding slow and deep. The mask beneath your fingers was no longer merely a mask. It was a doorway, a beckoning shadow, breathing on the edge of your world. And as the distant bell struck another solemn note, a slow crescendo in the hush, you understood the quiet promise. Folded into the age-worn curves and whispered lacquer, the price had begun to call your name. The room seemed to hold its breath with you, the masks closing in, watching, waiting, and somewhere just beyond sight, the shadows stirred once more, no longer patient, but moving forward. The breath in the room felt heavier now, as if the air itself had thickened into something nearly tangible, pressing lightly against your skin. The flickering lantern cast restless shadows that wavered like uncertain spirits along the worn wood, while the faint hum of ancient silence wrapped around you, a cloak both familiar and oppressive. Your hand lingered over the mask's surface, every fingertip tracing the delicate fractures as if reading the frail script of time itself. Outside, the fog clung stubbornly to the village, a pale, shifting mantle that blurred the edges of rooftops and trees alike. The distant toll of the temple bell reached you once more, slow and measured, a string pulled tight between minutes that stretched and lengthened beneath the cold morning light. You inhaled, the sharp scent of cedar laced with the faint ashes of burned incense filling your nostrils. It grounded you, a small tether, to the world beyond the walls that held you captive. The shadows in the corner shifted subtly, breathing with a life just beyond full sight. Your eyes traced the bottleneck of darkness, its curling tendrils twisting gently toward you, patient and inscrutable. A faint chill slid down your spine, settling in the crook where your scarf no longer reached. A whisper of winter's breath pressed close. Your fingers tightened their hold on the mask's edge, the lacquer cool and unyielding beneath your skin. Each slow, deliberate stroke of the sandpaper was a small battle against time and memory. You could feel the grain of the wood surrendering in small fragments, softness emerging where once only roughness reigned. Yet beneath the surface, an invisible pulse seemed to resonate, a heartbeat hesitant, like a secret waiting to be uncovered. The faintest shimmer slid across the mask, a subtle flare of light caught between cracks, as if it breathed under your touch. Somewhere beyond the paper screens, a distant murmur whispered through the fog. Neighbors speaking in hushed tones, breath barely stirring the cold. The soft rhythm of their voices offered a fragile companionship, a dim chord of shared endurance beneath the weight of solitude. You allowed yourself a brief moment to feel this delicate thread, a warmth like embers hidden beneath snow. It was a fleeting ember in an endless winter. The room around you sighed softly when you shifted your stance. the tatami creaking its weary sigh beneath your feet. The fabric of your kimono rustled, a faint reminder of your movements in this quiet world. Your gaze returned to the mask, now catching the lantern's trembling light in a melancholy glow. The lacquer held the sheen of old rain on dried earth, subtle, reflective, and filled with stories you could almost touch. A sudden, almost imperceptible sound flared at the edge of your hearing. It was not quite a scrape, but a soft drag, like the reluctant breath of old wood weary of holding stillness any longer. Your breath stilled, frozen in the frozen air, as your eyes sought the source amid the shadows. Nothing moved, yet the silence compressed inward, thickening to the point where each heartbeat echoed loudly against the walls. You stepped with purpose, bare feet cushioned by the tatami's threads, drawing silent circles near the dark corner. The shadows pooled like ink spilled across paper, dense and pliable beneath the weak glow of the lantern. Your hand brushed lightly against the nearest shelf of masks, a cold contrast to the warmth lingering in your chest. Hollow eyes stared back, silent sentinels holding centuries of forgotten prayers and long-held fears. Returning to the table, you resumed the ritual, sandpaper whispering against lacquer, the soft hiss blending with the draft slipping past the floorboards. The mask's surface grew ever smoother, yet the weight inside it seemed to swell, the very air charged with the subtle electricity of a story unfinished. The deep glaze beneath your fingers felt almost alive, as if it pulsed with the secrets sewn invisibly into its ribs. Your breath came slow and even, each exhale a quiet cloud dissolving into the still, cold space. The distant temple bell chimed, its slow cadence marking the passage of moments that felt suspended between eternity and now. Outside, the doorstep cracked faintly beneath the slow approach of a cautious animal, a stray, perhaps, or a whispered visitor, wary of breaking the village's fragile silence. The sound faded quickly, swallowed once more by the thick fog and the stoic houses waiting patiently. You paused, the moment rich with tension, yet laced with a fragile calm. The amber light of the salt lamp pooled in warm rings around its base, its honeyed glow softening the edges of darkness, just enough to make them inviting rather than threatening. You pressed your palm against the worn wood beside the mask, feeling a pulse, not just beneath your fingers, but in the quiet beat of the room itself. The shadow in the corner shifted again, not retreating, but weaving closer with patient intent. Your heart, steady until now, skipped once, a pale flicker of unease threading through your veins. Your gaze locked on the spot, just beyond reach, where darkness deepened like a slow drowning in ink. And suddenly, the smallest movement caught your eye, a shimmer like heat rising from a distant flame, flared briefly then receded, leaving the corners heavy with expectation. With the lantern's light flickering uncertainly, a whisper stirred in the silence. Your ears strained, but caught only the ghost of sound. A breath without voice, the soft rustle of secrets crossing thresholds long closed. It was not fear that settled over you, but an ancient knowing. Ah, call, subtle and relentless, like the tide pulling silently at a forgotten shore. Your fingertips found the edge finally, the point where lacquer and wood met in quiet surrender. The mask gleamed now with a sorrowful grace, concealing depths beneath its fragile surface. The task loomed near completion, but with it came the implacable promise woven through every faded line. You drew back slowly as the room seemed to exhale, the weight shifting once more. The shadows bloomed, folding themselves further into the flickering corners. And in that slow unfolding darkness, your eyes caught one unmistakable flicker, a single pale eye opening just beyond the veil. The whisper returned. This time, it brushed your skin with the cold breath of inevitability. And in that frozen instant, you understood. The story was no longer a silent echo from the past. It was awake, and it was coming for you. The weight in the workshop seemed to press in closer, folding around you like the thick fog beyond the paper screens. The lantern's flicker trembled against the wooden walls, shadows lengthening and retreating, as if uncertain themselves whether to linger or vanish. Your gaze remained riveted to the lacquered mask, its surface smooth now, but beneath the gentle glow, the cracks yawned with silent histories, waiting to unfold. Your breath extended slow, pale curling clouds dissolving into the cold air, and each exhale seemed to pull a thread from the tangled quiet. The worn fibers of the cloth brushed your fingers once more, rough but familiar, as you traced the masked wood in slow arcs. Scent of cedar mingled with ancient ash, and somewhere between the sharpness of the cold and the soft ember of incense, you found fleeting comfort, a momentary anchor amid the stretching stillness. Outside, the village remained locked in silence. The fog rolled with ghostly deliberation, swallowing shapes and sound alike. Only the far-off temple bell punctuated the gray, tolling slow and sure like a heartbeat tethered across distance and time. You shifted, feeling the tatami yield beneath your feet, its grain warm despite the bite of winter pressing at your skin. The fabric of your kimono whispered faintly as threads shifted in accord with movement measured and deliberate. Around you, the masks sat like sentinels, hollow eyes fixed in eternal watchfulness, seeming to deepen their gaze as the lantern faltered. The stillness curled tight, and the air grew thick with quiet anticipation. A breath held between the soft scrape of sandpaper and the distant tolling. That quiet was broken by the faintest drag of something unseen, a subtle scrape that slid across the floorboards just beyond where sight could reach. Your heart ticked once, sharp but contained, each beat a cautious drum in the hush. The shadows in the corner coiled tighter, a slow pulse beneath the dim light, weaving between the beams and walls with silent patience. You knelt, fingers trembling only slightly, and let your hand hover again over the lacquer. The surface shivered faintly beneath your touch, less object now, more promise wrapped in glaze and memory. Carefully, reverently, you edge the sandpaper over the final curves, coaxing out a deeper sheen with the faintest of motions. Time stretched thin, each second elongated by the ritual unfolding in fragile rhythm. Warmth gathered low in your chest, an ember kindled by the thought of unseen neighbors braving the cold together, their muted murmurs threading through the fog. You imagined the veiled glow of hearts hidden behind shuttered windows, a fragile comfort flickering against the vast chill. For one heartbeat, the vast solitude softened. The cold receded briefly, a shadow retreating to the edges of your skin. Yet in that softened space, the veil of darkness pulsed more insistently. The shadow in the corner moved, subtle and deliberate, an echo compressing into form, arms folded like patience in the dark. The faint glimmer remained, shifting just beyond your defenses, a spectral eye flickering calmly against the fading lantern light. Your fingers froze, the sandpaper pausing mid-stroke. A whisper grazed your ear, not words, but breath, soft as the rustle of autumn leaves brushing one another in the gloom. The air grew dense, static settling like dust on every surface. The room seemed to inhale with you, the weight of expectancy wrapping like fog around bone and thought. Slowly, you met the gaze, half seen, half imagined, rooted in the darkness. A single pale eye, reflecting ancient patience and quiet demand, unblinking and waiting beneath the mask's lacquered veil. It hung there, poised at the edge of understanding, neither threatening nor inviting, but impossibly present. The worn wood beneath your palm vibrated softly, an echo caught between the pulse of living and the silence of memory. You drew back, breath held taut, the final moments stretching out, a thin thread of hesitation tangled with inevitability. Outside, the temple bell tolled again, dragging its slow note like a stone through water. The village held its breath with you, wrapped tight in frozen quiet. And as your fingers lifted for the last delicate swipe across the mask's surface, the shadow shifted once more, closer now, the darkness folding inward like slow ink spilling across parchment. The single eye blinked, slow and deliberate, and the whispered breath slipped from the silence like a cold promise. The story was no longer just waiting beneath the lacquer. It was awake, and it had just begun to watch. The lantern's fading glow softened the edges of the workshop, turning rough wood into gentle shadows that stretched and melted into one another. The weight that had pressed so heavily on your shoulders seemed to lift, eased by the slow rhythm of your breathing and the quiet understanding growing within the stillness. Your fingers moved one last time, gliding over the surface of the final mask, now gleaming with a tender maturity. The lacquer caught the fragile light like a promise kept, hiding its cracks beneath layers of patient care and quiet reverence. The secret weight it had held whispered no longer threats, but closure, an old story laid to rest. Beyond the paper screens, the village continued to hold its breath. But the fog began to thin, folding back like soft silk to reveal the weak, pale blush of dawn. The distant temple bell tolled once more, but this time its sound was not a sharp echo in the cold. It was a slow, gentle peal that seemed to weave through the waking world, stitching the village and workshop back into fragile light. You lowered the sandpaper, fingers lingering against the smooth curves a moment longer, before letting the cloth settle softly onto the table. The harsh scrape that had held so much tension was replaced by a soothing stillness that hummed. Through the worn wood beneath your palms, the shadows in the far corner, the silent watchers that had stirred with patient insistence, receded with a breath, folding away into their ancient slumber. Their single flickering eye, so vivid just moments ago, dimmed and finally closed, as if understanding that the reckoning had passed and the balance restored. A warmth blossomed within you, not the fire of passion, nor the sharp edge of fear, but a gentle heat, a slow ember glowing beneath the cold that had long settled here. It was the pulse of connection, small but unyielding, born from the silence shared by the village and the quiet resilience of its people. Outside, faint movement stirred, the first cautious footsteps on frost-cracked earth, the soft murmur of a neighbor's voice carrying on the wind, the distant rattle of shutters welcoming the new day. All stitched a delicate ribbon of life around the stillness of the morning. The village was breathing again, slow and deliberate, as if waking from a long dream. You rose carefully, the tatami beneath your feet whispering its familiar resistance. The rough fabric of your kimono brushed softly against your skin, lighter now, as if the day itself was shedding the cold weight of night. Your eyes swept the workshop, taking in the rows of lacquered masks, the silent sentinels whose hollow eyes now seemed less ominous and more like quiet witnesses to an ending. The final mask rested peacefully upon the table, its story complete. It no longer carried the threat of the unseen price, but the quiet dignity of a tale told and laid to rest with care. You pressed a hand gently to its surface, feeling a cool smoothness beneath your palm, a final benediction offered in silence. Outside, the mist lifted fully now, sunlight bleeding soft and pale across the village rooftops and frozen fields. A faint breeze stirred the bare branches of trees lining the narrow streets, scattering old leaves that cracked beneath the tentative footsteps of dawn. The air, crisp and clear, carried the faint scent of pine and earth waking from sleep. For a moment, you allowed yourself to sink fully into the peace settling like a soft blanket over the village and your own tired frame. The cold that had bit and pressed now loosened, melting into the steady ember warmth, glowing quietly inside. You glanced once more at the paper screens, through which the slow blush of morning filtered gently. The workshop, with its groaning floorboards and ancient walls, breathed quietly in the rising light, a place that had held its secrets close, but knew, finally, the relief of release. The masks around you might still watch silently, their faces frozen in time, but their weight had shifted. They were no longer silent judges, wary of the price to be paid. They were quiet keepers of history, guardians of stories now safe in their resting place. You, too, were part of this weaving, an unseen thread in the fabric of time, carrying the fragile hope of endurance and renewal. As you stepped toward the door, the sunlight touched the old wood with a wash of warmth, softening the rough edges and banishing the last shadows. Outside, the village stirred fully awake, its breath no longer held, but released in a collective murmur of life, returning. You paused at the threshold, feeling the cold slip back, just enough to remind you of winter's grasp, but no longer its dominion. The journey had ended, not with a clash or a shout, but with the quiet closing of a chapter that had waited patiently through seasons and centuries. With a final glance behind, you stepped out, the soft sound of your footsteps blending with the gentle stirrings of a new day. The silence that once weighed so heavily had transformed into a calm companion, one that invited peace, reflection, and rest. And as the light grew fuller, wrapping the village in its gentle embrace, you knew that the story, while ended here, would linger softly in the quiet moments to come. An echo of time, a whisper of resilience, and the soothing balm for a weary soul ready to drift gently into sleep.